All right, Alexis asks Pastor Steve, is radiometric dating reliable? Why or why not?
When you're talking about radiometric dating, there's a number of different types, and people get these things confused. So carbon-14 dating, for example, does not date dinosaurs, and people always get messed up on that. Carbon-14 dating is good for thousands of years as far as dates go, but there's some issues with the equations that are being used. It's based on what's called an equilibrium. It's the idea that there's as much carbon-14 coming into the atmosphere as there is going out. And when you do an equation that's based on that, you're going to come out with certain answers. And the problem is that there's not an equilibrium. And I know I just use big words. It's kind of an equilibrium. When I explain this, it's like if you like overflowed your bathtub. So you go turn your bathtub on, you plug up the drains, and you turn on the water in your bathtub. There is no equilibrium until the bathtub is absolutely full and then overflowing onto the floor. And at that point, you have as much water going out of the bathtub as you do going in. That's an equilibrium. And what should be happening in the atmosphere? Carbon-14 is obviously, it's connected with CO2 basically. And so carbon-14 is found in the atmosphere. Everything that breathes this stuff, and so it gets mixed in. And it's formed by radioactive particles hitting the upper atmosphere, hitting nitrogen and knocking off particles. So nitrogen's atomic number is 14, carbon's is 12. And so it knocks off particles. It acts like carbon, but it's a radioactive element, and over time it decays. And so you got all this stuff happening in the upper atmosphere as far as carbon-14 being plugged in, and over a period of time it decays. And it's got a decay rate, and that's called a half-life. And that decay rate is on the level of thousands of years. And so over a period of time that goes out of the system because it just decays out. And we've got means of measuring carbon-14 that will date all the way back to 90,000 years. And after 90,000 years, there's not enough carbon-14 in anything to be measurable. Okay, so it only works up to 90,000 years.
Now, are they still using radiometric dating to go to the millions of years?
Yeah.
So then right there you have a problem.
That's a different method altogether. So carbon-14 dates organics. So
we're talking like the Mount St. Helens then?
No, we're talking about
like trees.
No, we're talking about you. We're talking about trees. We're talking about animals. Like if you died, you've been breathing carbon. You've been breathing the atmosphere. You've got carbon-14 in your body, and after you die, no more carbon-14 is being put in. And so over a period of time, you got a half-life there. I think it's 5,700 years.
Okay.
Something like that. You've got a half-life there, and after 5,700 years, half of it's gone. Another 5,700 years, another half of it's gone.
Okay.
And so based on an equilibrium, you would do a ratio and figure out how much carbon-14 is in you. So the ratio is accurate. The equation is problematic. And what they found with carbon-14 dating is the younger dates for carbon-14 are can be pretty good, but when you match up carbon-14 to historical dates and you start getting older and older, it starts getting off.
Right.
Yeah, and it starts dating it differently.
She asked specifically uranium-lead dating. Also.
Okay, uranium-lead dating. Most of the old age dating methods are not uranium-lead anymore, but that's where you get the 4.5 billion years for the age of the Earth. And with any dating method, this is what you're doing. You're making assumptions. So here's the first assumption. Let's just use uranium-lead. So uranium 238 decays to lead-206 and it's got a half-life, we believe, of 4.5 billion years. And so the first assumption that you're making when you do a radiometric date is basically that you started out all uranium, okay? So you're talking about, you found a rock, it's half uranium, half lead, and the automatic assumption would be, well, that's got to be 4.5 billion years old because it takes uranium 4.5 billion years to turn half into lead, okay?
Gotcha.
That's a half-life. So 4.5 billion years. Your first assumption that you made is that it was pure uranium when you started. That's the first assumption. And do you know that? And the answer to that is no, you do not, because nobody was around 4.5 billion years ago. Okay, so that's the first assumption. The second assumption that you've made is that nothing's touched that rock basically in the last 4.5 billion years to take any of the uranium away or to take any of the lead away. And so what you're postulating there is a closed system. Okay, and that's problematic too, because you can leach away uranium with a weak acid. And so you start leaching away uranium, and the rock looks older, just because some of the uranium's gone. You got more lead to uranium. These are all ratios that we're doing. You don't have an absolute date. You have a ratio. The third assumption is that nothing has speeded up or slowed that process down over the 4.5 billion years that you've got there. And every single one of those assumptions we've found is something that you cannot assume, because there are things that can speed up the process rate, and there are things that can slow it down. And in actuality, the process rate is just kind of an average process rate. Those things, they move faster and slower depending on what's going on. And so that's how that's put together. And as far as uranium lead dating, that's what was used to date the Earth, and it wasn't used for a rock from the Earth. It was used on a meteorite.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep.
Yeah. And so that's something that I found out that irritated the snot out of me. And what they're doing is they're assuming that meteorites were created at the same time that the Earth was, and that could be a good assumption. It might be, but I don't know that. Right. And then you have these elements out in space where they're subjected to all kinds of radiation, and now you got issues with process rates. And I don't know that the process rate hasn't changed. And then and again, you don't have a closed system and all of that kind of thing. And so there is a way to check these things, and the way that you check these dates is by checking them with
known events, right?
Yeah, known events, formations specifically with known historical dates. And so most things are not dated with uranium lead, it's potassium argon. And so when you do a potassium argon date, and again, potassium, radioactive potassium changes to an inert gas, argon, over a period of time, and it's got a half-life. And when you do potassium argon dates, it's done on lava. And the assumption is lava's melted, and so any argon that is in the lava is going to be taken out because of the melting process. And when the rock hardens, the potassium begins decaying, and any argon that is in the rock is going to be from the potassium that has started with the decay that began at the point where the rock hardened. And the problem with that is every historical formation that we know that's been dated in that way, all the dates are wrong, and they're wrong by orders of magnitude. So that means they're wrong by a lot.
Right.
And so you're adding zeros to a number. So for example, Mount St. Helens was dated up to 2.25 million years old. The lava dome on Mount St. Helens dated 2.25 million years old, and it was formed in 1984.
Yeah. And
so the answer that people come up with to that is, well, this process, the dating method does not work on young rocks. Well, obviously it doesn't work on young rocks, because it was Mount St. Helens, and it's been Vesuvius, and it's been Kilauea in Hawaii. There was a formation that was formed in 1801. We know it because Captain Cook went by the Hawaiian Islands in 1800, 1801. There was a point that came out where lava flow had extended the landmass, and so we know the date. And again, we're talking millions of years for these things, and they're not millions of years old. Obviously, the one in 1800 is only a couple hundred years old, and so again, like I said, the answer to that is it doesn't work on young formations, and the answer to that is how do I know that that all the formations aren't young? You know, how do we know how old they are without dating them? And so that was the long answer. Short answer is there's all kinds of assumptions in radiometric dating. They're not necessarily true, and radiometric dates on formations with a known history are always wrong. And so
there you go.
There you go.
Hopefully that helps, Alexis. Thanks for posting today. Hopefully that blessed you.